Hey everyone, welcome to Outside the Walls. My name is John White.
Casey McDonald.
And today we are joined by David Anguish. David is an author and recently wrote Getting Acquainted with the Bible. Casey's going to show us that there. David has been a preacher for a very long time, taught school for 12 years, preached in Memphis for 15 years for the Southwind Church, and more recently was a writer for Truth for Today. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're super excited you accepted coming on the show. Casey, you had a couple of questions about getting acquainted with the Bible. Obviously, this book, from the title, you can kind of tell what the objective is there with that. But, walk us through it, Casey.
So I was curious, is there any significance to the part of the Bible that it's open to on the cover? It's Psalm 143 there.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I will tell you what happened there. Ken Mills actually did that for me.
I saw that.
And Ken just, he pulled a graphic and that looked good on the cover. In fact, to be honest, I never noticed what the passage was. Like, wait, there's a there's obviously a passage.
Right, it's open.
Of course, one problem is I can't see it. So, that's... But no, I think probably it's because, and again, I think he just pulled the graphic off a site or something. And I think probably what it is it's just open kind of in the middle.
Okay.
I mean, that probably has as much to do with it as anything.
Okay.
But yeah, Ken did all of that and just sent this and said, hey, what do you think? And I said, well, that looks good. Thanks.
Okay. Nice. Well, the title of the book, Getting Acquainted with the Bible. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about why you wanted to write this and tell us a little bit about the book? Yeah,
well, the subtitle, I think, is maybe more telling in some ways. It's Makeup, Purpose, and Story, and that's kind of the areas that it covers. What happened, well, two or three things happened. Number one, and I go into this in the intro to the book, that I was in 1983. And I started teaching school at Greater Atlanta Christian in Atlanta, and one of the first classes they gave me was seventh graders, Old Testament survey. And those poor kids, I mean, it was like I had to adjust to the fact that, okay, these are junior high kids. You got to get this down to their level. But one of the things I was thinking about, even going in on that, was, okay, I need to be sure they know the basics, because just most of them had been in church from the time they were babies. Some of them had been in school. They were seventh graders. They'd been in our school since they were in kindergarten. But that didn't necessarily mean that they knew, kind of the basics. So I wanted to just be sure about that. There wasn't any textbook. So what I did, I just sat down and wrote some manuscripts and handed those out and with questions, and we went over them in class, and I made sure they had all the right answers, so hopefully they could study those for the test. And so that's kind of the core of the book. I mean, I dealt with what is the Bible, why study the Bible. That's where I originally wrote what's chapter 3 in the book, book, chapter, verse abbreviations, because it occurred to me we just sort of absorb those and learn. People without a background in the Bible don't have a clue what in the world all that means, and especially when you start abbreviating the books. In fact, if you notice in the book, one thing I did was I go after I do the chapter on abbreviations, before I start using abbreviations for book, chapter, verses. Before that, they are all written out, and that's the reason I did that. So that was the heart of it. And then in about 2018, which I looked up and saw when I did this, I was invited over for the campus class at college to do a two-part lesson, if you will, on the story of the Bible. And in preparation for that, I read Christopher Wright's book. That's, I would say, the other Wright. Everybody knows N.T. Wright, but Christopher Wright is an Old Testament scholar, very good scholar. He's written several books, and he's done several in this vein. But the title of this book was Knowing. I can't remember the title. Knowing Jesus Through the Old Testament. Okay. And of course, if you know Jesus of the Old Testament, he lays that out for the whole story. It's an excellent book, and like I say, he's done several of good things that I've been aware of over the years. And so that really becomes kind of the basis for chapters 4 and following in this book. So the first 3 chapters kind of came out of that initial thing. Another thing that happened was talking to a friend of mine, preacher friend of mine in Memphis, about the time, 2018 or so, when all this is happening, and he's telling me about a student who had, well, he was at Harding. I say at a Christian university in the book, but he was at Harding, and he had grown up under this guy's tutelage, and he just, he said, he comes home and he tells the guy, he said, man, he said, the other students in my class don't know the story. And, they'd studied all these different passages and all these different lessons, but he said they don't know the story. And then there was another student in town who was headed back. He lives in Ohio, and he was headed back for the summer. And he said, they're going to ask me to teach the teenage class. And he said, man, you know any good material? So they just don't know. So I was telling him about this stuff I'd written, way back, and then had revised it a few times along the way. And I started putting together copies for him, recommended some other things, but put together copies for him. And so I gave that to him. And while I was doing that, I thought, it's maybe about time to polish that material and rework it into something. I'd looked at it on the shelf for several years, but I was always busy with something else, and thought someday I need to develop that. And so that's, I was kind of in between projects at the time, and I just sat down then and started putting it together. A lot of it was, it was together in one sense. I just had to shape it and form it and so forth. Yeah. So that's how it developed.
Yeah, I appreciate the practical aspect of it as well. You mentioned the abbreviation. I won't mention who, but somebody was asking me recently, is it all right to put a period instead of a semicolon in between chapter and verses? And I was like, well, I mean, I can tell you what I learned in school, and we never use periods, but you even addressed that in that abbreviation section. And so I took a picture of it and said, look what I found. And so it's okay to put a period there. But as practical as it gets, but it also, covers the story of the Bible, which I think is great as well. You mentioned your background teaching junior high kids this material, and you've put in some different activities to help them learn books of the Bible. I was wondering if there's any funny stories that you've had in putting those practice games. Not
that I can remember, really. I mean, there's always stories that come out of the classroom setting. And I will say this, that I ended up teaching the high school courses. Okay. But what I say was, I spent 6 years in junior high. But it was, I had seventh graders. When I was still in junior high, I preferred eighth graders, and they were beginning to start thinking a little more critically and so forth. But then I really was happy that they finally moved me to high school. Yeah. But there's always funny stories, and not so much about that. But I mean, a kid was reading one time, and we were studying Acts, and we'd read the text. And so we're reading along, and it was Dorcas. And we're using the New American Standard at the time. That was kind of the text for the school. And this poor person, I don't remember if it's a boy or girl, but this child is reading along and said, and the windows were weeping. Not widows, windows. And I just lost it. I said, must have been some condensation in that room or something. Stuff like that. I mean, there's always something in a classroom, and that's part of the fun. No 2 days are the same. Yeah,
one of the games that you listed in there was a sword drill, and you tell them the Bible reference, and see whoever gets there first reads it. I was putting that game into practice, and it was a middle school class. And so they start shuffling through their Bibles, and before I know how to hear, whoosh, I was like, oh no, like that kid straight up tore a page out of the classroom. I was like, oh, it's okay. I'm sure we can get some tape. But
I just ripped it right out. I use that now, and I use that in the school classroom, the way I did that. And actually, I used that drill a few years later with a group of freshmen. Because it was always funny because I'd always, for several years, especially when I was teaching like freshmen and sophomores, I would give them a Books of the Bible test. Oh, we've known that since we were fine, then you'll do great on this test. Well, invariably they'd bomb it. Some of them would. And I mean, it was like the test in the back of this is pretty well typical of what I did. I mean, I had the divisions of the Bible. I did matching on that.
They thought they were just going to be listing the books of the Bible.
Well, they couldn't even. Well, one reason I quit having them do that is impossible to grade. because
There's no Scantron for that just to pass through.
We didn't have Scantron till about a month before I quit teaching. But no, the problem with that is they list them, but okay, how do you grade it if they leave out Hosea,
Right.
or put Hosea? After a while, it's okay. How do I? I mean, they got all the books there. So. Plus, I had a teacher at Freed Hardeman that our memory verses were fill in the blanks. So, when I did memory verses, that's how I did them, and that helped. But the way I did it was I had the divisions of the Bible. Well, then I had this list down the middle of the page, and on either side, okay, give me the book before and after.
Okay.
And I would tell them, look, you can, before you start this, you can sit down and write on your test paper, you can write the books in order.
Yeah.
But then that was easy to grade then. I could just knock that out. But the ninth graders with the sword drill was just to get them acquainted with where the Bible was. And usually I would give them, 2 or 3 shots of getting the test.
Right.
But what I did on that was I divide them into teams. Of course, in a high school class, you got 20, 25 kids.
Right.
You could do this. I divide them into teams, and they kind of rotate. Well, then I keep score. And the winning team got the highest grade for the day. Of course, nobody got below. I did it like on a 25-point.
Yeah.
So, nobody's getting below 88%.
All right.
And the next time they might be on the winning team. So, I mean, that helped their grade.
Yeah.
You learn to find all kinds of ways to help their grade.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
If you made them think it was bonus points.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I've said for years, I had kids that would sell their mother for bonus points. I mean, it was still a bonus. They wouldn't do any work all semester, but you give them bonus, and so it was.
Yeah, that's unfortunately I was that kid in school. I was like, I've got a D, I need a C. I need some bonus points somewhere.
Yeah, I'd put bonus on tests, and I had one girl one time that made 100 on the final exam, and her average dropped because she had nailed all the bonus all the way through. And what I found out was typically it was the A and B students that would do the bonus on a test.
Right.
So
the ones that didn't need it anyway.
Right. But you found ways to help. And so that was kind of what I did with that. But the sword drill was a good thing because you're actually having them do what you want them to do for learning the books.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not just so you know where all the books are, it's so you can find them.
Right. That Bible book drill, that was a good one too, where you just take a foam ball and you pass it around, and to get an idea of where the books are, because even I remember as a college student, as a freshman in college, we had to list the books of the Bible. And I don't know how Dale Manor graded that, but all I remember is, as a Bible major, I don't need to get any of these wrong. And he made us spell them right too. I mean, if they were spelled incorrectly, it was wrong. It didn't matter if you got the right order.
I remember that.
I just remember this is just going to be a matter of shame if you get it wrong.
So you want to be a Bible major?
I don't think it was ever a question of if these are out of order. It's like you're going to have them in order.
It's
they're going to be spelled right.
He's doing that with college students. Probably for the same reason.
Oh, the same exact. He would tell us as much.
You can't assume.
You think you know them, but you probably don't.
Well, I will confess that it was when I started teaching, this material, and of course I did it. I taught this particular unit of stuff probably 2 or 3 years, and so it was when I was doing that I really got the Old Testament down. I mean, I knew them. But it's like, okay, what? But I got them down. And of course, part of my problem, I will tell you this, and I put this in the book, I've got a chart in here that gives you the Jewish breakdown and all that. But part of the problem, once you learn like the Jewish breakdown, or you learn in the New Testament the topical, Paul's epistles, then I had a harder time than remembering where they were. So tablets and all have solved all that.
Right. Kids are like, why do I have to search for it? It's in a list right there. Just tap the little thing.
That's right.
I'm curious about something, David. So I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong in this assumption, writing a book is, you're kind of putting yourself out there when you publish a book and say, hey, I'm providing something of value. And I'm sure as you're kind of promoting that and putting that out there, you're getting feedback from people. What is one of the sections of the book that you've gotten the most feedback about in terms of, hey, this has benefited me the most? This is the thing that people keep saying, like, I love this part because I absolutely needed to know that, or I was really blessed by that.
Well, the Intertestamental chapter.
Yeah.
Which,
Helpful.
what I do, and, I've got those divisions of the Bible, which I stole from a mentor I had. That particular arrangement, and I had adjusted a little bit. And then what I did, there's 14 of them, but one of them gets a whole chapter, and that's the Intertestamental. And then a couple things there. Number one, I've gotten, oh boy, that just really helped me. And I'm just from different people I've known over the years, that turned into about a 6 or 7 week class in the campus class at college.
Oh, wow.
Out of this book. Somebody said, well, and then I started working through that. A couple of things there that were kind of funny. I started working through that, and I realized I knew, I didn't realize, but this is just the bare minimum in the book. And yet it's an area where we just don't know.
Yeah, very understood.
And what one person told me, a friend of mine in Atlanta, an older lady down there, I shouldn't say that, but she's a little older than I am, but she told me, she said, now some stuff finally makes sense in the New Testament. She's taught ladies classes for years. She's a really good Bible student, but she just had never done any of that. But it's just the bare minimum of material. In fact, when I got done teaching it in the campus class, Dale Manor was in the class, and he said, well, it's pretty good as far as it went. Which, he and I haven't. And he was right. He was right. I mean, it was just a bare, and yet still it was, digging into stuff. And so I've gotten that. I don't know. There's one friend of mine who I know because she's told me several times via email or Facebook messages or whatever, she has used the book, and I don't know what particular parts have appealed to her, but she's used the book several times for people that are brand new to the faith that she's working with, and she hands them this, which is, of course, part of the design. Yeah. It's been used, those kinds of things. There's a prison minister in Florida that has used it. I don't know how, I haven't had any feedback from him about how successful it's been or anything like that, but, they bought several copies to use in their prison ministry because, it's a blank slate.
All right.
That's the point. Yeah. Is that, so, but probably as far as comments go, the intertestamental section has probably, I've heard most. Yeah. But again, one thing that happens with writing, and this is different from teaching and preaching, okay, but is that the feedback you get is not quite as immediate or as often. Of course, part of that is when you're preaching, teaching, it's just easy for somebody to come out and you learn, okay, which ones were, hey, that, great job, and just, it's kind of but then you also learn, but if you're standing right there, you're more likely to get those kinds of things. Whereas with a book, I like that point, but, I
may not ever hear anything from them.
Huh? I mean, I don't sit down and write authors. I mean,
So, now that I think about it, I don't think I have everything. Yeah. I don't know how many that I know personally.
Yeah, I have a time or two, but it was to get a question. I'd say, well, I'll just venture and ask this guy a question. It's always funny when you do that because sometimes you'll get, it's obvious not the first question or only question he's dealing with that day, and he just gives you kind of a quick response, which is fine.
It's funny that you mentioned the intertestamental period because last night we were talking with my teen class about how the Bible was written and kind of thinking through, a collection of works that equals a story. And one of my kids asked me about that, and I was like, "Yeah, I can get you some information on that. I hadn't prepared anything for that, but they were kind of curious about it." And I was like, "Oh, yeah." So
it was.
I may have to grab a copy now.
It was fascinating because I used that material a good bit. I was teaching Luke Acts with sophomores when I was teaching school. And I used the intertestamental. That was kind of the introductory unit to the course. And it was always so much fun because 10th grade was also the year they were taking world history. And it was amazing. It was amazing the kids who would come, hey, we talked about that today in world history class. And that I loved because, again, I think one of the things that happens with Bible study, even in our churches, we say, well, yeah, all this happened. It's really fact. But we don't connect it in with the history, which is, again, one reason there's a chart near the end of this book, a list of world events in Jewish and Greco-Roman culture and how they correspond to the events of Jesus' ministry in the early church. It's just laid out there. And just, again, it's just a list. It's nothing elaborate. I'm not trying to discuss it one way or the other, but I mean, these were real people interacting with real world events. And I think that kind of brings it to life a little bit.
One thing that, as people are, maybe somebody brand new to Bible study, that they're wondering is, well, do I start at Genesis and just read every book to book to book, all the way to Revelation? Or, these books obviously aren't laid out 100% chronologically. And so what would you say for a new Bible studier would be the best approach to?
Or if we were going to introduce someone to the Bible and begin walking them through that, and they've never read it before.
Well, that's a great question. I'll give you a couple of different directions. Well, I'll give you one while I'm thinking about how to come up with another one, maybe. But there is philosophy guy's written many books, apologetics. He was at Boston College, I think. Peter Kreeft is his name. Just written tons of stuff. Kreeft. Just written tons of stuff, and he did a little book that I picked up several years ago, 3 Philosophies of Life, where he's dealing with Ecclesiastes, Job, and Song of Solomon, and he makes the point in the Ecclesiastes section that depends on who you want to talk to, is what his point is. He says with the modern reader today and culture generally, he says I start with Ecclesiastes, because it's dealing with the philosophy of life and the idea. It's very humanist. In fact, it tracks really well with, if you look at secular humanism. In fact, I've taught it this way, where I go through some things right out of the Humanist Manifesto and lay it side by side with Ecclesiastes. And so he says that's where you start today. He said it used to be you'd start with Genesis. But he said the world's different now. Now that was his take on it, and that book's 25, 30 years old now. So now, as far as starting with the Bible, I probably would put people in the Gospels first. And I say that in part because I think sometimes I've got a quotation I ran across several years ago in another book. That the guy makes the point that, if you get Jesus down, Jesus is who the Bible says he is, then everything else falls into place. And indeed, the Old Testament, is authenticated, and creation and all of that. So you work from there, but Jesus is who we want them to get in touch with. So I'd put him, I think I'd start him with there, and then as to which gospel, I think it depends on the person. Mark's good and short, people like that.
Very action-oriented.
Yeah. Matthew, again, it just depends on where they were. And then probably there, I wouldn't, and again, I don't think you want to bog them down. I wouldn't in, the prophets right off the bat, because there's so many misunderstandings about prophecy anyway. And then, and then in the same thing with in the New Testament, where are they in their development? You want them to get into that stuff, right? Because it's amazing how, Paul is, for example, in Ephesians, he's writing this very secular culture, and you look at number one, what he tells them to combat that, and then number two, this strikes me in several of his writings, but it's as if he thinks they really can live holy lives in that culture. And I think that's important today. To look, the world's against us here. There's all kinds of things pulling at us, but this is doable. But we have to teach it. And that's important.
Well, that's helpful. You also mentioned some get to these resources for extra biblical studies, kind of help you understand the Bible. If there was one that you would say, if you don't have it now, you need to get this to help you along in your study of the Bible. Oh,
now you're talking about for the
Bible study resources.
Okay, so Bible study not the Intertestamental.
No. It would have been the Appendix 1.
Right.
If you're going to have a book 2 to getting acquainted with your Bible.
You had some general Bible introductions.
First of all, I need to remember what I listed here. I say that because it's, for example, I wouldn't put people in the Bible Atlas right off the bat. And see, a lot of these are just real basic tools. Okay, again, it would depend on the level, I think. Mike Armour's little book, A Newcomer's Guide to the Bible, is real basic. In fact, if I remember correctly, Armour he wrote that in conjunction with Eastern European Mission. I think at one time he was president of EEM. Okay. But he wrote this book when they started making inroads into Soviet Union and Ukraine, because they got people that just don't know anything. Now it's more elaborate and detailed. I mean, it's still pretty simple. I mean, it's not, well, by elaborate I don't mean it's real technical or anything. Yeah. But there's more to it as far as what he's doing. But that's a good little source. I've used that. There's there's the book. There's a study guide that you can get with it and so forth. And then at some point, I would think Fee and Stewart's how to read, both of them, but How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth is really good.
That's a classic.
Yeah, is really good. Yeah. But again, I think they've got to have some basic understanding of what's going on, and then you're starting to clear away some of the cobwebs that occur. Yeah. Okay. And they also in that book walk you through, okay, this is a different, I say walk you through, they introduce you, this is a different kind of literature. Mm-hmm. Not all of it reads, you don't do the same thing with every style of writing in the Bible. And I deal with that some in this book, but again, not in great detail. Yeah. Just, I'm trying to whet their appetites and give them an idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned technology resources, and we've kind of hit on technology. Mm-hmm. I'd be interested to hear your take on how, you've mentioned having tablets and computers has helped a lot with, kind of understanding geography and time. How is technology and getting people studying the Bible helped? And also what may be some hindrances that technology has provided?
Oh, I'll give you one hindrance right off. I had a fellow in one church, and he, this is what he would say. Well, I got an 8th grade education. Now but I doubt he had gone to college. We never really talked about it. But he was a great Bible student, one of the best Bible students. And I mean, he'd throw out something and he wasn't sure about it. He'd chew on that and chew on that and chew on that. And sometimes he'd reject it. I remember one time I preached a sermon. I dealt with some topic, and I dealt with it before. And he comes up to me, he says, "That's not the same way you covered that the last time." And he was right. And he threw out a couple of things, and I went and dug in with the next. And part of the reason was he had thrown out some things to me. But he comes up to me one day. He had gotten a tablet. It had a little bit of Greek on it. So he starts, now the Greek word here is, it was, that is the meaning, but there's a little more involved in it than that. And, I don't want to get into all the details and didn't want to. I try not to do that other than, I'm glad I know the languages and can work with them and explain them, hopefully, in such a way. So it kind of makes everybody an expert, if you will. Well, I mean, and that's not a bad thing. You just got to work with that. I think another thing that happens, and I catch myself doing this, I think if you're teaching and preaching, I think it can serve to keep you on your game a little better. Okay. Because especially as our buildings are wired now, or not wired, but we've got the networks, and invariably you say something in a sermon, I mean, somebody can look it up right then. And say, nope, that's not what happened with that story. And that may be just an illustration somebody's used. But again, that goes to credibility. I think by the same token, see, some of those things are wonderful things to have, in a positive way. For example, my tablet. In fact, right now my tablet's in the shop. I'm crippled, because one of the things I've got on it is my Bible app, and I mean it's like the one of the big Bible computer programs, okay? And I've got all these tools. I mean, I can look up this, that, or the other right then if I'm curious about something. Of course, that can get you in trouble if you're supposed to be listening to a sermon because you start chasing these rabbits. But I did that anyway. I did that with books when I had the Bible in book form, or if I was carrying a Greek text with me to services, which I would sometimes do. And look, and so I'd be chasing down these rabbit holes and realize, what's he been talking about the last 10 minutes? I don't know. But it's a good thing, I think, because it can put you into things, and stuff is available, and it's easily available.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's better than a lot of other stuff that we end up looking at on our tablets or whatever.
Well, and that's one of the things that I love about working with the youth group is this generation, they grew up with these things in their hands, and so they're very used to having access to information almost immediately, and never really having to sit and wonder, what is the answer to that question. And so I love that, in a sense, you can talk about something with them and they immediately have access to data about that, and they can start digging through and into that. And I think that's a really neat thing, but it also makes everyone an expert.
Well, an expert. The problem is, there's not a lot of depth, and there's not a lot of training to process depth. I mean, look, the Bible, and almost hesitant to say this, but it's exactly right. But you got to be careful with this terminology. But the Bible is an adult book. I mean, it's for thinking. And for example, you asked earlier, where do you put people? I remember one time teaching a high school class that was juniors and seniors, where I was in Atlanta, and I taught them one quarter, and I taught the book of Romans. Well, I say taught the book of Romans. I did a survey of the book of Romans. Which is about all I want to do. But I wouldn't do that with younger kids, because you got to be at a certain level of development to process that kind of a book.
Yeah, there's a lot of theology in there.
And so, in our culture today, I'm just, I'm almost citing stuff that's out there talking about our culture. I've never been, and I'm dating myself here, I was never a big bumper sticker guy. Because I felt like, if you can boil it down to a bumper sticker, you probably aren't saying, but okay, Twitter is bumper sticker.
Yeah.
That's it. And so everything now has to be boiled down, and that's the danger of that. And yet, I think, again, recognizing that danger, you pick up on that and say, okay, now, how can I move them to the next level? Understanding. But yeah, the reality, we can fight it, or we can figure out how to take advantage of it in a good way.
Right.
And that's one of the things that's really neat, is seeing people start to process and move through that information and find there is more depth to this than just what you can get from a bumper sticker or from, something you may have read really quickly on Twitter, you can move through that.
Or a Facebook meme. And by that I mean, a verse that's quoted, and it's like, let's think about the context of that.
You're writing about some fundamental truths that are important to understand, and you said the most important would be that God wants you to understand the Bible. And so that was in the context of, the Bible is written in the language, of the day, and written so that people could understand it. And now that it's been translated into English, the same holds true. And so how do you think that plays into maybe choosing a version of the Bible? What would you recommend for somebody just getting into Bible study?
I think we need, number one, to acknowledge that there are multiple translations that are good translations. Yes. We probably need to, and again, I think I make this point in a different way in the intro to the book about how these things are basic. Well, everybody knows that, and yet at the same time, they don't always connect it up and all. And I think one reason is we assume everybody knows it. So in translations, we assume, I think sometimes, that, everybody knows that translation is an inexact process from any era, any language. But at the same time, what a wonderful time we've got all these opportunities. So I would say, number one, it needs to be readable.
Yes.
Okay. I will confess, I've read Shakespeare, but I'm like,
don't know that you understand everything Shakespeare said.
I'm out of high school now, nearly 50 years, and it's like I'd rather not. I'd rather read that. Somebody did a modern speech version of Shakespeare, and somebody probably has. So you may get some people say, there's this, but the stories are incredible, but the language is tough.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's some of the older translations of the Bible. I tend toward, I'd rather have something that I feel like is a little more accurate and yet still readable English.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my base text and the text I use as the base, and here's the ESV. Partly because I was an old RSV guy, and you can't get those anymore. And so the ESV was sort of a redoing of that.
Yeah.
At the same time, the CSB, which is an update of the Holman, but it's the CSB. I've been reading it lately, and I, for the most part, like it.
Yeah.
It's.
I'm not familiar with what's the CS
Christian Standard Bible. Okay. And largely a group of evangelical scholars behind it, but it's sort of blends, as I've looked at it, it kind of blends both worlds with the ESV and the NIV.
Okay, kind of a hybrid between.
Now, the other problem, too, that I've noticed in Bible translations is, and this is more a practical thing from a teaching viewpoint, is they keep updating these translations. And the new ones are not always the same. And so what I have found is a lot of times when preaching and teaching, if I'm quoting the NIV, I will, this is the 84 NIV that I'm quoting here. Because people are sitting there looking and saying, well, that's not what my NIV says. And the same thing happened to me one time. I was preaching, and I had looked up a passage on my computer program from the ESV. And lo and behold, I'm reading, and then in the sermon, I've got my Bible text, That's when I could still read the print. So, I wasn't using a tablet and I'm reading, I thought, wait, that's not what that says. And here I was using a different edition of the ESV, and it was just a word or two different. So I think that's important. But I'd say readability.
Yeah.
I think accuracy with the text is important.
Yeah. Well, I think that lines up. I was in a class with Dr. Jack Lewis years ago, and he was talking about it, and he said the most important Bible version to read is the one that you're going to read. Yeah. And that stuck with me all these years. There's a lot of debate out there about my version was like, get one that you're going to read.
And again, if somebody's comfortable with what I would say is a little more challenging style of the language, great. And I mean, there's still some things. Something I was working on the other day, and I quoted the ASV to illustrate, because it brought out whatever it was in this text. And that's the thing I've always tried to do is, I will use multiple translations in teaching and preaching. Never, I hope, my goal is never, I just like the way that kind of agrees with what I think about that. I try to, whatever I quote it because I think this is, in my judgment, what is closest to what's going on in the text. Yeah. And sometimes I'll quote more than one, but there's some real advantages. And, I mentioned the ASV because I think it was Charles Spurgeon who said it was good Greek and bad English or something to that effect. That's a bad paraphrase, but he was talking about how it's just tough the language was in places.
Yeah, that's always been kind of my thought process and approach is, you guys know from studying Greek, there are lots of ways to approach sometimes the translation of a word, and sometimes meaning is hard to convey. Right. And so if you're reading multiple translations, you're kind of seeing, here's how different people approached conveying that meaning. And so one of them may tell you something and you're like, oh, now I understand what's going on here. Whereas if you just stick to the one, you may not ever get that. And so it kind of helps to, especially if you're preparing a sermon or a lesson or something, you're going to talk with somebody about Christ. Looking at those things and being like, okay, I really get what's going on here because these different versions phrased it differently. And now I got
the beauty of the original languages is one of the things, and we've different people have talked about this over the years. They're dead languages. In that it doesn't that doesn't. Now it changed at the time. It was that we miss that sometimes, but that's it. That the original text is not. It's not changing. So now you're trying to line up the translations with it. I think a study Bible is important too, because, and again, there's so many good things out there now that, just which study Bible, there's multiple. In fact, that's been the discussion. Preacher stuff recently was the study Bibles. And somebody actually did mention another translation that I have found helpful for kind of bringing out the accuracy or exactness is the NET, New English Translation. Not the NEB, not the New English Bible, although I've used it in a place or two too, but the NET. And the study notes in it are you can get online, or you can get. I've got a book copy of it, but and it's got like 60,000 notes, I think, on the on the text, and
that's a ton.
They can, and they'll sometimes there are little explanations of what's going on. Short kinds of things.
Well, this is a great tool for people just getting into Bible study. One thing that I really appreciated was, as you're wrapping up the book, you said, through knowledge of the content of the Bible, thorough knowledge of the content of the Bible is no substitute for living a life worthy of the Lord, but it helps us build the necessary foundation for such a life. And so I think that's an important thing to remember as we get into Bible study, as we're trying to weed through, how things laid out, how they happened in our history, that it's really supposed to be changing the way that we live.
Right.
That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and the best, it's helpful to understand. And so that's the goal, is let's make this as understandable as possible. But the goal is always to live it.
Right.
It's not just an academic exercise, certainly.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, if you are out there and wanting to get more acquainted with your Bible, if you are wondering, what have they been talking about this whole time, you can grab a copy of Getting Acquainted with Your Bible. David Anguish is the author of that. And where can they find the book?
Well, you can order it Amazon. In fact, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's available in ebook. And again, most of the the ebook distributors, you can just type in "Getting Acquainted with the Bible" or my name, I would assume. I've got also on my website, davidanguish.com. And yes, it's Anguish. For all my life, that's it. It really is that. It's Scottish background, I think.
The last name.
Yeah, Scottish background. But people can't, it's like Anguish. That's, so I'll spell it. It's davidanguish.com. But I've got a page for the book, Car Collects Publications for the book. And I mentioned that because, I can sell it directly, but also there are discount options there that you can get for bulk purchases or even review copies that are available there that you can't get the other places. But it's at one time, and I guess I probably should have called over there and checked, but one time it was at Harding Bookstore.
Oh, okay.
But that may be just is it in stock?
Right.
But they're aware of it over there, and they could order one. So
if it's not over there, we'll grab a stack of them from you and just sneak over and start putting it on the shelf.
Yeah.
Well, David, we appreciate you coming out and joining us today and telling us a little bit about your book and sharing your insights with us.
Well, I appreciate it. Glad to have the opportunity.
Yeah, this has been fun. And as always, we love you guys. We hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you're at right now. And we will see you next time.
Yeah, and if you have any questions that you would like us to address on the podcast at any time, you can always email those to questions@wschurch.net. Thank you guys for tuning in. Love you.